Well, hey there, and welcome back once again. We've had some fairly intense lessons in the course this week, and there's at least one more yet to come. So, we're going to take things easy in this segment and have a quick introduction to working inside of themes in WordPress. This is an important topic. It's one we're going to come back to next week when we talk a little more specifically about taking a custom design that you've worked on and applying it to a theme. And what I'd like to do this week is give you some basic terminology and go over some concepts that are going to help in laying a foundation for that more intense work a little bit further down the track. So let's go into our appearance area here, and let's go into the final section, which we haven't taken too close of a look at yet, and that is the editor. The editor is what allows us to get into the code behind our theme. So this is where things begin looking a little scarier as we're confronted right off the bat with some sort of strange looking information here. And it turns out what we have right now on the screen is a CSS file. Every theme in WordPress comes with a style.css file. And that one file has the vast majority of the styles, in some cases all of the styles, that particular theme is going to make use of. What we have at the top here inside of these comments, and we have an opening comment in the form of the /*, a closing comment after that. What we have in between them is some metadata about the styles that follow. If we scroll down far enough here, we're going to begin encountering some actual CSS markup. And as we continue to scroll down, we find more and more markup until we reach the very end of the file, and we scroll on back up and see more markup on the way back up. So there's quite a bit of CSS here and quite a bit of complexity built into these pre-made themes that come with WordPress. And really, any theme is going to have a fair amount of CSS behind it. But the CSS isn't the only part of the theme, and in some ways it's not the most important part. Themes also come bundled with a set of PHP files. Those are the documents that we see over here in the right rail, and those are, in fact, template files. Here we have templates and the files underneath them. Collection of different files here, and eventually, if we scroll to the bottom, we get down to the styles.
It's 2 o'clock.
And as you can see, there are several different style sheets here, but the main one being style.css. Now, depending on exactly what theme we're working with, we may have a different number of template files available to us. Some themes are going to define more template files than others. What happens when we browse through a WordPress site is WordPress says, okay, the user is on the home page, or the user is on a particular post, or she's on a section landing page. Given the particular page the person is on, we're going to assemble the website by pulling together different template files. And so WordPress on the fly figures out what template files to load based on where the user's at, assembles those files, slaps on the CSS, pulls in the content from the database, loads up any JavaScripts that need to be in play as well, and generates the page. And that is the essence of what we mean when we talk about a dynamically generated website versus a static page. We're pulling together all these resources from different places and using them to create our content. So the key to the template system in WordPress is that it's modular. And by that I mean for a given page on our site, almost always, multiple template files are going to be pulled together to assemble that page. In fact, WordPress uses a very standard kind of convention in generating pages. It has a header portion at the top, a footer portion at the bottom, main content that goes in a left reel, and then sidebar content that goes in a right reel. And it turns out that these different regions, the header, the footer, and the sidebar in particular, are discrete template files inside of the theme. To prove that, let's take a look over here and see if we can find our header file, for example. We'll scroll down. There it is, header, and it's header.php. Now, what do you imagine might go into the header portion of the page? Well, if you're thinking it's the stuff at the top, you're definitely on the right track. Let's go ahead and click on header.php. We'll take a quick look at what's in there. We have another comment section at the top, metadata about the file. And then the very next thing we get to is our doc type, identifying this as an HTML document. So this truly is the content right at the top of the page. Further down, we hit the head tag. We've got a meta tag for our char set. More information, the title, we're bringing in some links. And eventually, we actually hit our body tag. Here it is. And there's some content that goes at the beginning of the body that also is part of our header. So it won't surprise you to know that if we go into our footer page and scroll to the bottom of the footer, the last thing we're going to come across is the closing body tag, the closing HTML tag. And then between the header and the footer, we get everything else. That sidebar content I mentioned is here in the sidebar template. And the reason this is so important to the way a WordPress site is structured, the reason it's so powerful, is it allows us to set up pieces of our site that are going to become consistent from one page to the next. And we can modify these pieces and make changes on a wide scale across our site. For example, we could go into our header file. If there was some content that we wanted to show up at the top of every page, and we could put it into our header.php file. Whether we were on the home page or a particular post deep within our site, if whatever content we added is in that header file, it's going to show up on that page. Let's take a quick look at how this would happen. We'll come into our header.php file here. Okay, come down, and I'm going to add some content right after this div ID main right here. And I'll just say this is a little test. And I'll update that file. With that change in play, let me come up here and visit my site, come to the front end of the website here, and see if I can find the code, or the text I should say, that I just added. And here it is. This is a little test. It's over there on the right, not quite where we would expect it to be, but remember, all of that positioning is really controlled by the CSS. So there's some sort of file style, I should say, coming into play here that we're not quite aware of yet. But there's the content. Now, I'm on the home page. Let's go to that About page that I set up earlier on in our lessons. Well, there's the content again. This is a little test right in the same spot, and it's going to be there for every page on my site because every page is pulling in the header template file. Okay, let's come back in here and get rid of that little test. And suppose I put that content right after the opening body tag. Let's drop it in right there, and we'll save our file, come back to the live site, back to the home page, refresh things here. Now the text once again is on the page, but it's showing up right in the upper left-hand corner, which is roughly where we'd expect it to be, given that it's right after that opening body tag. Here again, if I go into another page or post on the site, the content is still going to be there because it's part of that template file. Okay, one thing that we need to also pay attention to here is that there are quite a few different template files. And some of these files work a little bit differently than the header and the footer and the sidebar templates. Let me get rid of that test, update the file. Okay, so one way that WordPress template files work is by being assembled and then together forming a page. For example, I can take the header and I can take the footer, I can add them together, and I get the makings of a page. That's one way to think about template files. The other way to think about template files is in terms of what kind of page we're on. Are we on the home page? Are we on a particular post on the site? Are we on the 404 page, which is the page that we get when no content can be found on the site? Those kind of template files are also part of our theme, and they allow us to change the appearance of our site depending on exactly where our users are and how they're accessing things. So header and footer are about maintaining consistency across the site. Other template pages like 404.php or home.php are used to create content, layouts, and styles for specific contexts. So let's load up the 404 template here, and we'll take a look at what this all entails. So inside of this template, we have just a little bit of code. First of all, what we do is we grab the header. That function right there, that function call, get_header, is actually pulling in the header.php template. The one down at the bottom here, getFooter, it's pulling in the footer template. So we've got the header, the footer, and then the rest of this template is defining the middle section. And that middle section includes some basic HTML markup here, as well as some messages that get printed out on the screen. And we print those messages out using a special PHP function, _e. WordPress uses this to take some content, print it out onto the screen. Always a good idea when we're embedding content inside of a theme to use that particular method. It helps to make sure that WordPress knows about the content, and that's important, especially from a long-term content management standpoint. So let's take a look at what would be involved in editing this template file. Let me come here and try to load something that doesn't exist and see what I get. Okay, so here's the 404 page, the page that shows up when it can't load content. Well, this is somewhat embarrassing, isn't it? It seems we can't find what you're looking for. Perhaps searching can help. And, oh, that's nice, we get a search box there. But let's say we wanted to modify the message on this 404 page. How do we do it? Well, we'd edit our template file. Let's come back over here, and let's say we want to be a little more emphatic about this. It's not a question, it's a declaration. So we'll change the question mark to an exclamation mark, update our file, come back to the page here, load it up, and there we have our change in effect. A very small change, but indicative of the kinds of changes we can make in editing these template files. So we have different contexts. We have things like the 404.php file. Now I mentioned home.php. You'll notice if we scroll through the list here that we don't actually have a home.php file. Now, not every theme I mentioned earlier comes with every possible template file, and it so happens that the 2012 theme doesn't have a home.php file. What we can do is come in and grab a generic template file. A good one to work with is index.php, which is what WordPress will use if none of the other contexts really make sense. Let me see if I can find that file. There it is, main index template. So what we could do is copy all this content, and I'm going to bring it into my text editor, create a new file, paste that in, and I want to call this not the main template file, but we're going to call it the homepage template file. Okay, I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to save it as, on my desktop here, home.php. Okay, now I'm going to come over to FileZilla, and I'm going to come up to my main theme folder here with all of my template files. These are the same files that we see listed inside of WordPress. Let me open up a Finder window here. Whoop, didn't mean to change to a different location. Let's see if we can get back into where we were. All right, WP content, themes, 2012, there we go. All right, let me try that again. And we're gonna grab that file off the desktop. Here it is, home.php, put it in the folder. Once it's copied up, we can come back into WordPress, refresh the page here. And now we have a home.php file. Okay. Now, if I come to my site and I come to the home page, because I've identified a home, let's go to the public site. Because I've identified a home.php file, that's the template that WordPress is going to use to load just the home page. And on other pages, it's going to resort to other template files. There's a single post template, there's that fallback index template. To show you what this means, if we come in here and make a change to our home.php file, well, there's the header, so it's pulling in our header, that's good. And here's site content, and let's say I wanted to add something right here. I'm actually going to put some HTML markup in place here. Welcome to the site. Okay. I'm going to update my file. Now, if I were doing this for real, I'd want to put that content inside of that _e PHP function. But this is just a quick test to test the concept out, so we'll leave it as is. Let me come back here now and refresh the page. Okay, so there's the content. Welcome to the site. It's at the top of the page, below the header, but otherwise at the top of the page. And here's the key. If I go to other site pages now, about for example, I don't get that content, because it's part of the home.php template, and home.php only applies when I truly am on the home page of the site. Okay, so a final point to make about editing these template files, and this is truly just an introduction to the process, is that we're working with a combination of HTML and PHP inside of these files. And so at a certain point, we have to kind of beef up our PHP knowledge to really work with these template files. Now, clearly that's beyond the scope of this course. It may be beyond the scope of what you really want to get involved with in terms of modifying WordPress themes. And that's fine. One thing to know, though, is how to differentiate between HTML and PHP when they show up on a template file. And I think it's also helpful to know how to use that simple PHP to just print some content out on the screen, much like we're doing now, but to do it in a way that's consistent with WordPress best practices. So we'll wrap up this lesson with a quick focus on that point. Okay, so most every template file, PHP file in WordPress, is going to be a combination of PHP code and HTML markup. Now we know what HTML markup looks like. It involves less than signs and greater than signs and tags and content in between them. So that's HTML, and that's all well and good. But what about PHP? Well, PHP is always going to end and begin, or begin and end, the same way on a page. And it could be that on a given template file, we have several different blocks of PHP, each one beginning and ending the same way. Let's take a look. At the very top of the page here, we have some PHP, and it begins with a less than sign, just like HTML, but then a question mark and the word PHP, all combined together. Anytime we begin a PHP section of a WordPress template file, it's going to look like that. Now, when a PHP section closes out, we have a similar format, but a little different, question mark and a greater than sign. And that means it's the end of PHP and the beginning of HTML. Sure enough, on the next line here, I have a div tag, and for a while I have nothing but HTML until I come to my next block of PHP, which begins here, and I have an opening PHP tag, some PHP content, and a closing PHP tag. That means on the other side of that greater than sign, I'm back in HTML land and I can type HTML. And then I have more PHP that starts. And throughout this template file and throughout all template files, I'm vacillating back and forth between HTML and PHP. Now, it's pretty important that I don't try to type HTML or plain text inside of PHP. That is a recipe for crashing a site. PHP code has got to be written in a very precise manner. And when we fall outside of that syntax, things start to go wrong pretty quickly. So we always want to be careful when we're working inside a template file and we're modifying HTML, for example, that we're really outside of the PHP portions of the script and we're working in a true HTML safe region. Okay, so a final point here is around doing a basic sort of thing in a template file, which is hardwiring some content into that template file. And as we've said, that's okay to do as long as we use a special PHP method to do it. Here's the method, and it's actually embedded in this page as well. We begin with the opening PHP tag, a space, and then an underscore, a lowercase letter e, an opening parenthesis, and then whatever content we want to show up. In this case, it's no post to display, followed by a closing quote mark. In this case, we're using single quotes. We could use double too, but we've got to be consistent on both sides of this string here. Here's the string. Followed by a comma, a space. That space is optional, by the way. And then the name of the theme. And then we close out the parenthesis, semicolon to say we're done with this PHP statement, a space, and a question mark and greater than sign. Closing out that PHP, meaning we're back into HTML. So that's a script that you're going to find at the bottom of this lesson page because it's one of those important scripts that we want to tuck away for future reference. And we want to use it anytime we want to hardwire some content inside of our template files. Now, the way to do it is to copy and paste the script into place, to replace the content at the beginning with whatever it is we want to show up on the page. And remember, it's a best practice to not put HTML inside of this particular code. What we want to do is wrap the HTML around the code. So let's take a look at one additional way we could do this. Here is the content I added before that I didn't use quite proper formatting for. If I wanted to do this the right way, here's how I'd go about it. I'd go inside of my h1 tag, I'd start a PHP script. It would be E_E rather, opening parenthesis. I'd put my content inside of quotes. I'd identify my theme, 2012. close the parenthesis, semicolon, space, and close out the PHP code. So that's the right way to hard code content into a WordPress template file. The HTML code can go outside of the PHP and should go outside of the PHP. And now when I update my file, come over to my live site, here's the content, welcome to the site. If I refresh this, it's exactly the same. The outcome is the same, the method we used to get there is a little bit different and a little bit more official. Now, if we look at the source code for the page, what you're going to notice is all we're left with in the source code is the HTML. The PHP has gone away, and that's a very important premise here. Unlike JavaScript, where we can still see it inside the source, the PHP is gone. And that's the difference between a server-side scripting language, which is what PHP is, and a client-side scripting language, which is what JavaScript is. Most of the time. JavaScript can also be server-side. But PHP is always server-side, and that means it's processed on the server. The server figures out what to do with that PHP code, and oftentimes that means content, HTML markup, gets generated. In this case, the PHP code generated this content, welcome to the site. And so the code fades away, we're left with the results of the code, and of course all of the other markup here that makes up the site. So that is a quick introduction to editing template files inside of WordPress. Quite a bit more to it, but that should get you started and give you some basic building blocks for going in and making some modifications to these files. So that's it for this lesson. In the next one, we'll talk about getting jQuery back into the picture. So stay tuned for that.